Hey, we back. I'm here with another video on Notbot. It's been a while since we did one on here, but there's been a big update recently, and I figured we'd do a couple of videos on the update. It will be a couple because it is a big update. Now, the update was in fact a couple of weeks ago. I'm a little bit late, actually, only 1 week. I don't know, whatever. Anyway, what it mainly has added is artifacts, which is what we'll be talking about today. There is also materials and market and stuff like that, which I will save for other videos. So yeah, artifacts. What are artifacts all about? Well, artifacts are kind of ways of altering all of the characters that you've got. So if you have a look at your dojo, we've done characters before, you've got all the characters here. What we can check is artifacts for each characters like that, and it's going to tell you what the artifact does and what you need to get it. Now, in terms of what you need to get it, blueprints, you need the materials in order to get those, which you buy from the shop, and we can do a video about them another time perhaps. And then you also need to complete the dungeon for that character, which is also a new thing, and we will also do a video about at some point. For now, I'm just going to go over the artifacts, what they all do, and which ones are good. Unfortunately, a lot of them are not that great, but some of them are certainly worth using, and I'm basically just going to go through all of them today and let you know which ones are worth using. As with the past videos on characters, I will not be doing Shattered because I don't have most of the Shattered characters anyway, to be fair, and I don't know enough about them really to comment. But we can do the others, and hopefully it will be not too long. So without further ado, let's get started. We will start with Ava. We'll just go along as we have done with the other ones. So Ava's one is Air Blades, deal 20% more damage, but Ava loses 30% of her armor while they're active. This seems pretty good. It's not hugely good because, of course, Air Blades, if you don't remember, you can use only once every second turn, because it takes one turn to actually use the ability, and then you need to attack the next turn. So this is 20% more damage every other turn, but Air Blades also do splash. So you could say by using the Striking Blades artifact, you are getting an extra 60% of an attack every 2 turns, which is, you know, it's worth having. It's certainly worth having. Ava losing 30% of her armor while they're active is not a huge problem, because presumably you are using a tank which has attention anyway. Ava shouldn't be taking too much damage. So this should be, in most situations, just a damage buff. So yeah, that's worth using if you are using Ava on your team. I would advise equipping that artifact. Of course, you're going to need to get the blueprint and do the dungeon to get them. That is the case with all of them, but yeah, Ava's one, not bad. Next we have Chloe's, reduces her root strength to double instead of triple, but her normal heal has a 40% chance to cast twice. So this is basically making you use her normal heal a lot more and using root strength a lot less. Now, it's kind of hard to say whether this is good or not, because neither root strength nor the normal heals are particularly good. In general, I would say it probably is quite good, because of course root strength is not bad in the fact that it triples the healing, but it takes an extra turn to do it, so it relies on you doing healing twice in a turn to actually be optimal. And of course with this, root strength is completely pointless, so you're not going to be wanting to use root strength if you're doing this. But on the other hand, it's an extra 40% chance to cast twice, which is better than the extra well, I suppose this would be an extra 50% healing, but this doesn't rely on you having to do it for 2 turns in a row. All in all, I would say this is probably worth using if you are using Chloe, but more importantly, as I've said in the past, Chloe is not very good, so I wouldn't advise using Chloe at all. But yeah, if you're using Chloe, I guess you can use the artifact. It doesn't seem too bad. It just means you don't have to bother wasting a turn using root strength, which is kind of nice. You just kind of get the effect anyway, so yeah, sure, why not, I guess. Then let's do Aiden next. Aiden's one is increases smoke barrier to block 65% for the team, but only blocks 15% for Aiden. This is kind of situational. I would say in general not to use it, because again, Aiden's a tank. You're going to want the tank to be taking the most damage out of everyone. So that would imply that this is good because it's reducing the damage for other people. But of course, Aiden's going to be using attention, which is going to mean that all the damage is going on to him anyway, so protecting the other people is not so useful. This really would only be helpful if Aiden is still alive but has run out of attentions. So maybe if you're doing like boss battles or something like that, where that situation is quite common, then maybe this would be a pretty good artifact, sure. But I would say in general use it's probably not, because battles aren't going to go on so long that you're going to run out of attentions, and so the smoke barrier on Aiden is more important than the smoke barrier on other people. So yeah, I would say use this one for boss battles perhaps, but not for general use. Then we have Izumi. Izumi's artifact is the crit chance of Hailstorm is doubled, but Tsunami doesn't cast a damage buff anymore. So all in all, if you use Hailstorm and Tsunami like equally, it's just kind of like, it doesn't really change much. You get the extra damage on Hailstorm, but the less damage on Tsunami. Now, depending on your playstyle, you may want to use Hailstorm more, you may want to use Tsunami more, and depending on that, this could be either better or worse for you. Both Hailstorm and Tsunami are actually reasonable supers, so it's perfectly plausible this could be good. I honestly think this mostly depends on your playstyle. Personally, when I used Izumi, I used Hailstorm and Tsunami pretty equally, and so this would be meh for me, I guess. But I know some people much prefer to use Tsunami a lot. Also, depending on who you're going up against, like what characters you're up against, you might not want to use Tsunami at all. So yeah, it kind of depends on that. But yeah, if you're planning on using Hailstorm considerably more, then yeah, absolutely, why not? Might as well go for it. Tsunami doesn't give a huge damage buff anyway, so you're not losing out on too much. Just depends if you plan on using Hailstorm, really. Then we have Yara, which means Water Spring also restores armor, but only resurrects 40% health of the revived ally. So this, I think, it actually really depends on who your other characters are, if their armor matters or not, because there are some characters where the armor really does matter, and some where not so much. The point where this is especially valid is with Yuval. Yuval, you really want that extra armor, and the less health of revived ally actually isn't too much of a problem, because Yuval is going to be using their ability that gives extra armor due to reduced health anyway. So if you're planning on reviving Yuval with this ability, then suddenly the artifact looks great. But of course, if you're reviving characters that don't have much armor or don't really care about armor that much, the health is probably going to do more for you than the armor. Although it is also worth mentioning, of course, that if they have the armor and not the health, you can heal the armor with Yara or another healer, whereas you can't heal the armor back. You can only heal the health. So yeah, that's worth mentioning as well. In general, I would say it depends on the team that you're going with, if they care about armor or not. But if you're being optimistic, then yeah, you can heal the rest of the health back up, and then absolutely use the artifact. You really have to be optimistic with that one though. Next we have Ethan. Wow, okay, an error executing the command. That's fun, eh? Okay, we're going over to the test server to find this one. Because apparently Ethan's artifact is broken. That's fun, eh? Right, here we go. So, this is Ethan's artifact. Now, this was pre-update, so they may have been balanced slightly different. I don't know if Ethan's one is actually this now. I don't know why it's broken, but let's just assume it's the same, shall we? Because the bot is 100% working all the time, trust me. So, feedback triggers automatically the end of every turn without costing battle points and without using a turn of Ethan. Additionally, Ethan's armor is reduced by 10 armor points. This, just like everything else that Ethan does, is kind of pointless. Feedback triggering automatically the end of every turn sounds really good because it's just 3 turns, but on the other hand, feedback, as I've said in the past, is basically the most useless super in the game. And so it's kind of unnecessary to have it trigger all the time. Reducing Ethan's armor also is obviously a nerf. So I think the same applies to Ethan as applied to Chloe. Yes, if you're gonna use Ethan, you could use this, but just don't use Ethan. Also, to be fair, don't really use the artifact either, because the armor reduction is annoying. And if you are using Ethan, you're probably not using feedback at all. It's also worth noting that I have tested that you cannot use feedback while feedback is active, obviously. So if you are using this artifact, feedback triggers, and then you can't actually use feedback. So you can't get a double use out of it, and so Ethan does get knocked down to a 1 super character, which is, even worse than he was before. So yeah, I would say not to bother using this artifact, but I would also say not to bother using Ethan at all, because he's bad. What do you expect? Let's hope the other artifacts are not broken as we move on to Volvia. Here we go. Volvia deals 1.5 damage to 1.5 times damage to characters that have an attention active, but any other attack is weakened by 15%. So you kind of have to think about this carefully. Obviously, only one character on the enemy team can have attention active at one time. This is not 1.5 damage to tanks. It is 1.5 damage to attention tanks, which is not the same as Volvia's super, which all targets tanks specifically. So this is not that great. Personally, I wouldn't actually say to use it, just because every other attack being weakened by 15% is probably going to have a bigger effect. The extra 50% damage on attention is nice, but it's easier just to avoid attacking characters that have attention when you can, using abilities during that time, whatever, than trying to go for the extra damage. Of course, if you are one of those players that likes to wait for the attention to be active, get a volcano, and then just go all in and one-shot the tanks, then yeah, I can see this working for you. But personally, I rather just to avoid hitting the tanks at all until I've killed off other stuff, because tanks aren't too good when everything else is dead, So yeah, I wouldn't use this artifact, but I can see that it could work in certain situations. Looks like Enger's artifact is broken as well. This update is fantastic and it works all the time. Very cool. So once again, we're going to go and check here. Okay, that's broken as well. Cool. Is anything gonna work? Hey, we found it. Okay, so firebombs heal 2 random characters in your team instead of dealing damage. So this generally I would say is pretty bad. This is the first artifact that I would say objectively makes things worse. The other artifacts are at least it doesn't make much difference. This one I would say is objectively bad because okay, healing 2 random characters in your team is okay, but in general if you want to heal characters, just heal characters. Healing random ones might not make too much difference, and one of the only good things about Enger is that the firebombs ability can target characters that don't have attention in the same way that things like Berlion's Earthquake can, and get around that. So by removing the ability to deal damage with the firebombs, you're now not using the one thing that's good about Enger. So yeah, absolutely do not use this artifact. It's not good. Right, next we have Charon. So, Charon gains 20% more health, but damage is reduced by 35%. This, in general, I would say is actually pretty good, because the only thing that's good about Charon is that Charon has loads of health. And so by increasing that by 20%, you're pretty happy. If you remember, Charon's skills as well are Headwind and Southwind. Southwind being based on max health, which this artifact is going to help with. And Headwind being when they take damage, percentage of damage. Obviously, the more health you've got, the more damage you can take, the more damage Headwind does. So either way, this is helping out. Damage reduced by 35% is kind of sad. Actually, Charon's damage is not that bad for a tank by default, but obviously it's a tank. You want the health. So I would say there are some situations where you don't want to use this, but in general, pretty good artifact. I would advise using that one. Next we have Berlion. Earthquake triggers Earth Fissure with 50% chance, but now also destroys Berlion's active golems with 50% chance if there are any. Now the maths behind this is kind of complicated. When this was actually first added, it was Earthquake triggers Earth Fissure 100% of the time, which was actually pretty good because Earth Fissure, if you aren't aware, means that Berlion's Earthquake ability does 75% damage instead of 50% damage to all 3 characters. It only has a 10% chance of triggering it, so to go up to 100%, that's a 90% chance extra to do an extra 25% damage. This is pretty good. I mean, 25% to all 3, which is an extra 75% damage at an extra 90% of the time. So that's like 70% extra damage, basically, total per 2 turns. It's almost a free attack, which is really good. But now that it's been knocked down to a 50% chance, the maths changes drastically, because instead of an extra 90%, it's an extra 40%, because default is 10%, obviously, which more than halves, actually, the buff. And so instead of getting an extra 70% damage every time you use Earthquake, you get an extra, like, 30% damage every time you use Earthquake, which is not as much. Now, the extra 30% damage every time you use Earthquake as well is every 2 turns, because you can only use Earthquake every 2 turns. The Earth Golems, of course, do 15% damage, which is, that's every turn, which is half of that 30%. And so by destroying them with a 50% chance, you are actually reducing your damage by 15% and also increasing it by 30%. Every 2 turns. So net gain is exactly 0. The difference is Earth Golems do that 15% to all 3 characters, so now we're at a net loss of 30% damage per turn. And also then you have to consider there's only 50% chance to destroy it. So like I say, the maths gets kind of complicated. I'm not going to go through all of it now. I mean, I've given you a gist just by waffling about that for ages. But the long and the short of it is, this is not good. You will end up doing less damage if you use this artifact, assuming that you use your Earth Golems at the start of every round, like you should be doing if you are using Berlion. So yeah, this was good when it was 100% chance. It's not good when it's 50% chance. That's just the way the maths worked out. The downside of having an artifact like this is that it is just maths to work out whether it's good or not, because it's just, will you do more damage or not? And unfortunately, at the moment, the answer is no, you will not do more damage. So, yeah, fair enough. To be fair, Berlion is powerful enough as he is. He doesn't really need the buff, so we'll cope. Looks like Artifact Mika is a broken command as well, so we're going to be searching in here once again to try and find the original effect. Here we are. The character lifted on the cloud can attack and does not lose any HP, but the dodge chance afterwards is only 35% for all characters. This is a kind of interesting one. The character lifting on the cloud can attack is kind of nice. That's basically a free attack as opposed to the normal where they can't attack. And so before it was a bit of a trade-off if you want to use cloud. Now it's basically, yes, you should use cloud all of the time. Cloud now becomes a really good ability. Of course, Mika being a healer, using their ability is debatably good if you want to use their heal instead. But in general, Cloud becomes a pretty good ability now. If you are not planning on using Cloud too much anyway, because you don't like it too much, then obviously this artifact doesn't really change anything. But I would say, assuming that you are going to use Cloud sometimes, this is a pretty good artifact, and might as well use it. Now, to hedge against the other ones being broken, I'm just going to find Yuval here, as it is written. Yuval's armor is increased by 10, but base health is reduced by 10%. So this, again, is just kind of maths-based. Is the extra armor or the extra health actually going to help you more? And that mainly depends on if you're getting heals or not. If you're getting heals, this is just bad. If you're not getting heals, it's actually really close. And again, I did the maths on it to try and figure out how much health you would have to have for the ability, because of course the good thing about Yuval is the ability that gives you the extra armor. And the long and the short of it is, if your Yuval is basically exactly level 26 when you first unlock the ability to go invincible, then this artifact is slightly worth using. But as you level up more and more, this ability is actually going to get worse, because you're going to be hitting the max cap of 100 armor anyway, so the armor being increased by 10 doesn't help. The base health reduced by 10 though makes it worse. So yes, basically do not use this one. Again, it's the same as Berlion's one. You just do the maths and the math says no. So that's unfortunate. Then we have Kiana. Kiana's sniper rifle can't hit herself anymore, but it only deals half as much damage. So this is okay. This is okay. Kiana's sniper rifle being able to hit herself is obviously a huge downside. It only has a 15% chance by default. So in general, you can rely on it not. Like for one arbitrary battle, you can rely on it not hitting herself. But obviously, if you're going for streak, it eventually will hit herself. And that enough by itself causes most people that use Kiana to not use the sniper rifle. Just because it's not worth the risk, you know? You will eventually get a match where Kiana does hit herself, and then you lose your streak and you're sad. So the advantage of this artifact is that you can now use that super without being scared about the sniper rifle. However, this depends on your normal uses of the sniper rifle, because if you normally go, I won't use the sniper rifle because I'll eventually lose my streak, then this is great for you, because it means you can use the sniper rifle, which is just free damage, even when it's only half as much damage as before. It's still a lot more than a normal attack, so why not? Might as well go for it. It's free damage. However, if you normally use the sniper rifle hit when Kiana is about to die anyway, in order to just take one character out as a last chance, you know, when they're at that 15% chance of killing herself doesn't actually matter anyway. Then suddenly this artifact isn't as good, because when you're doing that, you really want to get as much damage as possible, so you can take out like a full health Charon or something if you can. And of course, if you use the artifact, then don't. So this actually does depend on your playstyle. In general, I would say it's probably pretty good, and I would advise using it. But if you are going for those low health Kiana sniper rifle one-shots, then probably best to not, just because you want to get as much damage as possible. Then we have Elada. Rain revives allies for 30% of their max health, but also has a 15% chance to revive all dead enemies for 1 health only. So I would say this is pretty good, because having your characters at 1 health is not particularly helpful, and 30% max health is going to help out a lot. That 15% chance to revive dead enemies as well is pretty low, so while it suffers for the same thing as Kiana's sniper rifle, in that if you keep doing it, eventually you will lose your streak, because it'll happen. The difference is, while Kiana hitting herself with her sniper rifle can quite easily make you lose an entire match, actually reviving all dead enemies with 1 HP only is unlikely to make you lose, because it's only going to revive 1 or 2. Obviously, if 3 were dead, you've already won. And you can just one-shot them, you know? Since you have a brain, you will probably target them, and unless you're super unlucky and they have like an attention that is exactly ready at that point, those two characters, or that even one character that got revived, are not going to live long enough to do anything major. So even if the 15% chance triggers, actually, there's no major downside. So yeah, I would advise using this artifact. It's pretty good. Finally, we have Sama. Nighty Night heals Sama by 30% of their max health, but she loses 10% of her missing HP every turn automatically. This is pretty bad. So admittedly, matches are normally pretty short, only a few turns, and so losing that 10% isn't major. But I mean, if you compare it to something like Berlion's golems, who are dealing 15% damage each turn, 15% of Berlion's attack is going to be way less than 10% of Sama's max health, and yet the golems are pretty good and considered a good ability. So suffice to say that losing 10% of health every turn is huge. And while one ability healing 30% of max health is, you know, a pretty good ability, it's actually like not a major heal. There are other heals in the game that do 30% max health without too much issue, and don't make you lose 10% of your health every turn automatically. So I would say not to use that one. What I will do first, though, is I will check to see if it's been changed, because I know that was brought up before. So it may have, it's broken anyway. I was going to say it may have been balance changed already. This is entirely possible. In terms of balance, I don't know if it is the same as this. Then I would say not to use it. What I suspect is that the 10% has been knocked down to 5% or something like that, and assuming that is the case, still no good, just don't bother. Unless this percentage is like 1% or something, I would say this is not worth using, because losing any amount of health automatically at the end of your turn is not worth having a slightly good ability, especially, as I say, the 30% here not actually being that major. So yeah, I wouldn't advise using that artifact. Anyway, this was kind of longer than I expected it to be, but on the other hand, I said it would probably be long at the start, so sorry about that. I probably waffled quite a lot, but hopefully I've gone through all of the artifacts in enough detail that no matter what your team is, you now know what is up with their artifacts and you can go and hunt them. The advantage of a lot of the artifacts being kind of mediocre is that you don't really have to bother with the dungeons and the materials if you cannot be bothered. Personally, I took one look at my team and their artifacts and said, I'm not bothering with any of that, because as I've just discussed in this video, none of those artifacts are pretty good. Personally, by the way, I use well, as you can see here, Volvia, Berlion, and Yuval. All of which I said were kind of mediocre. Berlion and Yuval's, you do the maths and they're slightly bad. Volvia's kind of situational. Either way, I don't think any of those three are particularly worth using. So if you are using the same team as me, I would say not to bother. But yeah, there's a few artifacts that in there that are worth using, quite a few in fact. Most of them are slightly mediocre, but there are a few that are legitimately helpful artifacts, so that's nice. It's fun as well that the artifacts are not just always buffs, they're actually a decision that you have to make that can sometimes alter your gameplay, which is pretty fun. I like that. It's an interesting mechanic. I would just like it if the artifacts totally did just change your gameplay rather than some of them which is just like a buff or in some cases a nerf. But yeah, that's just my personal opinion on them. All in all, I would say pretty fun idea. So yeah, go and check out some artifacts. If you are using a team that can use them, then I hope you enjoy. And if you are not sure on how to get them or all the rest of it, I will be doing videos on the market and the dungeons at some point in the future, because they look pretty cool anyway. I've actually not taken a huge look at the dungeons yet because, you know, I don't need to bother with artifacts personally, but I will do soon, and then there will be a video on them. But anyway, I will shut up now. Bye!